Welcome to another episode of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Pennington, a partner at Penta, and today I'm excited to be sitting down with two experts from the United States Chamber of Commerce Foundation. We'll be diving into the latest in early childhood education, its implications on childcare and the future of work, as well as all the interesting things they're focusing on related to the future of data in K-12 education. Our first guest is Cheryl Oldham, who serves as Senior Vice President of the Chamber Foundation and Vice President of Education and Workforce Policy. And we also have Codella Low, who serves as Vice President of Policy and Programs at the Chamber Foundation. They both have decades of experience in the space and will no doubt make for a great conversation. Cheryl, Caitlin, thanks so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves and your career and what brought you to the Chamber Foundation to do this work?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us and giving us this opportunity to talk about our work. We could do that all day long. But I'm Cheryl Oldham. As you said, I've been at the Chamber and Chamber Foundation for 13 years now.
Okay.
Came to this sort of space of education and workforce, I guess not maybe intentionally. Grew up in Texas. Sort of stumbled into politics and moved to D.C. with that in mind. Worked for a newly elected governor named George W. Bush, and
I think we've heard of him.
Yes, and where and the issues that I was sort of assigned to as a 20-something were in this space of education. Higher education, some other issues. And then when he became elected president, I went to the White House and ultimately the Department of Education worked for him for 8 years, and then here at the Chamber Foundation. So it wasn't sort of a, intentional, I didn't study to be this, to get into this space, but it has been, now I have 2 kids. And so I feel like everybody has a passion for these issues when you have a couple kids and you live it every day. And so I've been at the Chamber Foundation, as I said, and Chamber also oversee the policy for the U.S. Chamber on these issues and have been doing it for almost a decade and a half. I can't believe I'm saying that.
Fantastic. Caitlin?
Sure. Similarly, I didn't plan on getting into education policy in particular. When I was in college, I was really, really interested in policy, and specifically social welfare policy was what I majored in. And I was a social worker when I graduated from college for a couple of years. And it was a fascinating experience doing that, working, on the ground with individuals every day. I was specifically a hospital social worker.
Oh, wow.
But I took an opportunity to move to DC, and I worked on the Hill for a bit. And education was one of my issues. And when I was a hospital social worker, I really saw how education really impacted an individual's life. The amount of stories that you had with patients that their sort of future started or stopped in a classroom was remarkable. Something that I don't think I really appreciated prior to that experience. And so I knew I wanted to do something in ed policy. So worked on the Hill and then took an opportunity to move over to the Chamber. Been there for over 15 years, which is, again, difficult to even wrap my mind around. And have been working in this space with Cheryl for 12 years? Is that even possible? Like that? We're so young. I don't.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a dynamic duo.
A dynamic duo. So I didn't intentionally get into education, but found my way there. And once I got into it, I never wanted to let go.
Well, that's interesting because I think so often when you meet people working in education policy, they have stories like that. I mean, education is such a personal thing to everyone, and everybody has their own experience in the education system in the United States or wherever they grew up. But I talk to people often that say, I ended up in education or early childhood education policy, and I didn't necessarily know that I was going to be there. there. But I think that's interesting because, I think when people think of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, they might not necessarily think, what is why is there a Center for Education and Workforce? Maybe tell me a little bit about why this is important to the Chamber Foundation's work and why this policy area is something that you invest in and think about every day.
Absolutely. So the mission of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation is to harness the power of business to solve big problems, both in the United States and around the world. And so one of the biggest challenges I think we have in this country is around talent. And it's kind of twofold. It's the skills issue and competitiveness issue, but it's also an opportunity issue. So as the largest, on the U.S. Chamber side, the largest advocacy organization representing the interest of business in the world is the U.S. Chamber. Its membership cares deeply about workforce, talent, ensuring their competitiveness, and that starts at the very youngest of ages. And then the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation is an affiliate of the U.S. Chamber. We get to, I think, have the pleasure of really diving into the program side of this. We're not advocating around policy and the foundation. We're building the programs that will help to advance these systems to work more effectively. And it starts with early education and childcare, K through 12, obviously, workforce development and training, post-secondary education. It is a pipeline of talent that needs to work more effectively in order to ensure, we are competitive as a nation, as a community, as companies, but then also so that individuals have opportunity.
Well, I want to pull on that for a second because I think sometimes when you think of early childhood education and workforce pipeline, you think, wait a second, isn't that daycare? But actually it's not, right? I mean, we are really thinking about our youngest learners and investing in our youngest learners from birth, right? So maybe can we talk a little bit about how the childcare system is so important to our workforce pipeline and how kind of all of that plays together? Like, what is the landscape of childcare in the U.S.?
Yeah. Kate, do you want to take this one and I'll chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's so funny you say that, Megan, because back, when we started this work in childcare about 7 or 8 years ago, we were sort of brought into it thinking about pre-K as a piece of, sort of this broader conversation in the world of preparedness for K-12. And when we started digging really deep into this issue, we realized that, the 0 to 5 landscape was this sort of gaping hole around workforce as an issue, right? And of course, fast forward several years and the pandemic hits and all of a sudden we're all having conversations via Zoom and your colleagues have their infants or their toddlers running around behind you and you're like, oh my gosh, this is really, I'm seeing what childcare as a workforce issue looks like every single day. And also not, surprisingly at that moment in time, I think the business community jumped in with, sort of both hands to say, how can we help our colleagues think about or solve these workforce challenges, and seeing what that meant for parents, both parents, mothers and fathers. But, unfortunately, mothers in particular were sort of saddled with working and kids. And we saw what that meant for women keeping their jobs in the workforce, right?
Kate, because I think you hit on something important, which is the women piece, which is we saw like a massive exodus of women from the workforce during the pandemic. And it was sort of pre-pandemic that it felt like childcare was this personal issue that as a working parent, you needed to figure out on your own, right? It wasn't, maybe there was benefits that your employer was providing, here or there, but it wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily viewed by anybody as... It felt
like an individual responsibility, right?
To manage and juggle and figure that out. And then I think the pandemic really, caused this shift, and we see it every day where employers come to us and they're saying, we were trying to figure out how to support are working parents because we see it in the data. We know that if they are worried about where their child is or that their child is safe or they're unable to show up for work because they have an issue with childcare at home, I mean, there is a bottom line issue for employers, but they also care about their working parents, obviously. And so some of the work that we have done is really to try to quantify that economic impact, both to a state economy, but also to the business community when that childcare system breaks down. And so we've just seen this, more and more that the business community is stepping in and up because they have to.
Right. Well, and I think as you mentioned, Caitlin, the pandemic laid bare this, I think like broken childcare equation, if you will, right? Working parents have to have somewhere to send their children if they're going, that's safe and that is, a high quality environment, place that they can get to, that they can afford. And that's the only way they can go to work. But we need a robust, vibrant workforce, right? And it seems like those two pieces kind of have to go together. So now as we think of return to work and people are back, like we're here together today, how has that equation, have we seen, you mentioned businesses are stepping up. I think there have been some federal investments. Like, what's the state of the childcare system today as we're in sort of, I don't know, a hybrid environment, what I call it?
Yeah, well, the state, it's still broken, right? Like, we have not fixed childcare. It was broken well before the pandemic, continues to be broken now. That being said, we at the U.S. Chamber Foundation have done a lot of surveying, right, of both companies and employees, trying to figure out, like, where are there answers to this really ingrained, like, this is not an issue, make no mistake, this is not an issue that we can just snap our fingers and pour a huge amount of money in and it, like, fixes itself, right? It's a very challenging issue. But we do know that there are things that really help the workforce in particular. So when you're thinking about hourly wage workers, right, predictive scheduling, just knowing, right, in a month in advance, I know I'm working every Tuesday, first shift, every Wednesday, second shift, every Thursday, first shift, right? I am then able to figure out what that childcare solution works for my kid and works for me as an individual, right? So predictive scheduling is one thing, right? Having this hybrid environment being another thing. Flexibility that I think we have seen leaps and bounds since 2020, right? Like the flexible working arrangements that I think companies have embraced, certainly employees have embraced, right? But then also figuring out what childcare solution works best for each family individually and embracing that. I think that is such an important piece of this conversation, right? When we talk about childcare, it is a really personal issue.
Sure.
I have 2 kids that are in childcare right now, right? Like, thank God I have a working system that fits the needs of my kids. But that was a deeply personal conversation and decision that my husband and I had in order to figure out what solution is going to work for my 4-year-old and what solution is going to work for my 1-year-old.
Which is an important part of, that solution is essential for you to go to work, right? And it seems like employers recognize that in a just even you say like in scheduling, in benefits available to their employees. It's an investment in a solid and productive workforce for them.
For sure. And I think, as we see way more jobs open and available than we actually have a labor force looking for work, employers are thinking more and more about what are those key benefits, what are the recruitment, retention, how do I get the best employees? And this comes up, right? This issue of childcare certainly comes up as one that I think they need that needs to be on the table if they're going to be able to attract and retain and compete, for sure.
Well, this makes me think of the CHIPS Act. So the CHIPS Act, tell me, what, if at all, will the CHIPS Act do to incentivize employers to think of creative ways to help their employees solve their childcare challenges?
I mean, the CHIPS Act is this massive federal investment in chip manufacturing. Sort of a competitiveness with China issue. It's not so much an incentive as it is a mandate. So if you're an employer that is seeking those federal dollars for manufacturing facilities, the requirement is that you have to ensure quality childcare, both for those individuals who would be constructing said manufacturing facility, and then also those who will ultimately work there. So it is, it's sort of a trade-off. You want at least if you're going after at least $150 million in federal funds, this is what you have to, you are required to ensure for your workers. It's, I think, challenging because, we've basically put on the backs of employers what we haven't been able to fix as from a policy perspective, right? Either, at the federal level or the state level, these issues, as Caitlin said, we have some broken pieces to the system. We have deserts where there's no childcare. We have, reimbursement rates that are probably not modernized. We've got a lot of issues with the system. And so what we've said is, well, we haven't figured out those things. So we're just going to say, employers, you got to figure it out. If you're going to have access to this money, you have to require this. And so I think it's going to be a real challenge.
Right. No, I think one thing just to highlight in what Cheryl just said is that 50% of the U.S. is considered a childcare desert, right? Like that fact kind of in and of itself is unbelievable, right? This means that a huge amount of kids are in a zip code that does not have the care capacity to serve the needs of working parents or, certainly the needs of these kids. And not surprisingly, right, when you look at the map of where a huge amount of these facilities are scheduled to go, right, like where the plan is for them to go, not surprisingly, a huge amount of them are in places where there is a childcare desert. So, we know that we are marrying location needs with a population that already isn't served in the way they need to be, right, in order to sort of step ready to work day one. We're not even talking about the skills gap challenges that we might be walking into in some of these places. And so I think this just tenfold adds to the challenge for the business community. Now, look, this is something that these workers are going to be dealing with regardless. And so I think understanding the needs of these communities that you are, sort of breaking ground in right now and figuring out how to help to serve these employees is important. It is certainly going to be even more challenging in a lot of these places that were already struggling before. We weren't at 100% and now we're just overreaching capacity. We weren't meeting the needs and now we have so much more, right, that we've got to think through. And not only that, right, the bar is really high here, right? It's about capacity. It's about quality, right? The quality commitment here is huge. And we know that high quality early childhood education is absolutely important for the kids that it serves.
And probably hard to define,
but it's not something you can just, it's a little difficult to but it's also not something that we can just say, oh, okay, we've figured this out, right? This is an everyday effort.
I think important to what Caitlin's saying too about the sort of issues that currently exist in these communities is it's not as though, X chip manufacturer can come with a plan that says we'll provide stipends or we'll provide connection services to ensure these employees have, can find childcare, or it doesn't, in many places it won't exist. Mm-hmm. So like it needs to be created, mm-hmm. right? And is it the center and run it?
And do they know how?
No, of course not. So, right. So there's just, there are people out there that can help them to figure that out. But it is one of those things. And as we've seen also, this is a requirement that has been placed on them. It's probably the 10th or 15th thing on the list of things that they are thinking about as they're standing up an entire mm-hmm. manufacturing facility to manufacture facility. So it's like, it's important. It's on the list. Yeah. They probably don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to figure it out. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to work in the community to figure it out. And it's, mm-hmm. It's a challenge for sure.
Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll hear more about the future of work and takeaways from the latest K-12 education data.
Penta is the world's first comprehensive stakeholder solutions firm. We are a one-stop shop for the intelligence and strategy leaders need to assess a company's reputation and make decisions that improve their positioning. As executives in the C-suite must account for a growing set of engaged stakeholders, all with distinct, fast-changing demands, Penta provides real-time intelligence and strategy solutions. We work with clients solving complex global challenges across a variety of industries. Our clients span technology, financial services, energy, healthcare, and more. To learn more about how Penta can support your company, check out our website at pentagroup.co, our Twitter at pentagrp, or find us on LinkedIn at Penta Group.
Welcome back to What's at Stake. Let's dive back in. So we've just talked a bit about how the pandemic dismantled many childcare options, making it difficult for parents to balance work and their children's enrichment. Has this had an impact on people rejoining the workforce? I think I have an idea, but talk to me about that a little bit. What has, we saw so many people drop out of the workforce. How has that return gone, and how has childcare played a piece of that?
I think we're slowly returning, and Kate, please, chime in here. I think we've seen, it was interesting. We saw men return much quicker, at a quicker clip than women. I think we're maybe back or, bringing women back. I think childcare still continues to be, and survey data and others still continues to be, one of the biggest mm-hmm. challenges, which is why we continue to be working, we continue to work on this as an issue. Kate, what have you seen more data?
Yeah, no, I think, so in the survey data that we have done, I think what has been interesting is prior to the pandemic, there was a general, you saw like a general need to rely on family, friend, or neighbor care. And that data has risen dramatically in the last 3 years. And I think my question in sussing that out is like, we talked about childcare being a really important personal choice. Is that something that you are yet still relying on because you sort of experienced it during the pandemic, and now that's, your desired location for childcare, mm-hmm. right, with a family, friend, or neighbor. But we saw that uptick high, and I think what some have said is that has really been surrounding the need. So like, you're in work, but you also need assistance for these, mm-hmm. Sort of wrap around these ripples mm-hmm. of being back in the office, right? Whether it be commute, whether it be travel, whether, you name it, all the things that being back to work, requires of you.
Mm-hmm. And I think we haven't seen, I don't remember the exact numbers, I should know this, of centers that closed during the pandemic. And I don't think that we're back to pre-pandemic numbers in terms of childcare facilities that are back and open. And so that obviously, we talked about it previously. We're already in a place where we don't have enough. Mm-hmm. And then so many closed. We don't have as many back now. I think your point about family, friend, and neighbor is really important. But it's also, it's probably out of necessity, but also, as you said, out of personal choice. And so anytime you start to talk about these sort of solutions to childcare that include, government run, that just from our research, from our perspective, that's just not what people want. They want the mixed delivery. They want options. They want flexibility. They want a system that works for them, as Caitlin's been talking about.
Well, and just to add on to that, Megan, I think a really important thing is we've struggled for years, right, on childcare as a childcare workforce is its own sort of separate issue here, right? And to Cheryl's point, I have a personal experience with this, right? My own child goes to, I had my kid on a list when I was 10 weeks pregnant. My 1-year-old, I had a list when I was 10, knowing that I was going to have a wait, right? There was no infant care available for her until she was 13 months old. Wow. Technically, she's not even an infant anymore, right? And so what is that? They used to have 2 infant rooms that were available and open, and so they were able to take 16 infants. Well, that changed to 1 infant room because of a childcare workforce shortage that they, as a center, were experiencing, right? And so then they had to close that. What did that ripples into this community, because now 8 infant spots that were available are no longer available, right? And so they are competing with every other workforce, right? Whether it be the Starbucks or whether it be, right? Everyone is competing for hourly wage workers in the same way. And I think childcare is sort of a micro case study in what does that look like and how does that affect the broader workforce.
Well, and it seems like, there's the challenge of today, the parent that needs to go to work, and then the childcare workforce that must be in place to support caring for the child so the parent can go to work. But then, certainly thinking about it from the perspective of the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, there is the competitiveness challenge in the big picture of those children needing a place to be while their parents are at work to prepare them to enter pre-K and kindergarten and be successful in K through 12. What investments must be made in the childcare system to ensure that our, youngest learners, birth to 5, are ready to enter our public school system or wherever they're going to go to school to be part of the workforce, when they're 18 or after college?
Couple things. One, sort of just flippantly, I always sort of joke, if we could just get the childcare system right, we would not be having a 3rd grade reading issue or an 8th grade math issue, right? If we could get that piece, quality childcare system available to all who need it, I think we would set kids up certainly for success down the road. One of the things when you talk about what needs to happen in terms of that 0 to 5 to prepare, when we first got into this business, it was partially because the only conversation that was happening in Washington, D.C. was about universal pre-K. And so it was about adding an extra year to the existing public education system. And that was really all that, this is a generalization I'm making. I'm sure lots of people talking about the earliest of years, but the biggest noise in this town was universal pre-K. It was all about this extra year. So 4-year-olds, maybe 3-year-olds. And if you look at all the research, and we did a report called The Workforce of Today, Workforce of Tomorrow, and it walks through all of this, right? And it talks about the importance of that 0, that whole time, not just 3 and 4-year-olds in preparation for going to kindergarten, but 0 to 5 as really critical in terms of brain development and all of that. So for us, that is the important piece, right? Fixing this childcare system, making the appropriate investments, incentives to employers to provide these benefits, all of these things that boosting the CCDBG and some of these other tax provisions. That's what we need to do in order to have the future workforce.
90% of the brain is developed in the first 1,000 days. That's the meaningful piece of the first 3 years of life, is that this is when the meaningful connections, right, the neurodevelopment is happening for kids. And so we're only focusing on year 4, then we've sort of missed the boat.
Well, and that's the piece that I don't know that people think about often, right? I don't know that even, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I don't know, but if I were about to be a parent, I would think I would not be thinking about, oh gosh, when my child is an infant, that there are brain development neural connections happening that will impact my child's ability to thrive in kindergarten or in 3rd grade or in 5th grade. But I wonder, how are we able to assess children once they get into, K through 12? Do we have an idea of, where our children are achieving in the school system? How are we tracking that? That feels like a very important piece of, American competitiveness.
Great segue into the Future of Data report that the U.S. Chamber released this year. So interestingly enough, Megan, for years, we actually do assess what in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school, we assess on reading and math. Mm-hmm. And then we also have a really, and this is that's a state test, right? We also have a meaningful assessment that happens in grade 4 and 8, right, on reading and math. It's called the Nation's Report Card, NAEP, mm-hmm. the National Assessment of Educational Progress. For all the acronym lovers in DC, NAEP yes. is the common, right? And we had years of data, right, that tells us how kids are doing, right, in reading and math in really important places. 4th grade is a really important marker for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. One is that, so if you think about K through 8, right, in kindergarten to 3rd grade, you learn to read. You spend a lot of time learning to read as a really important sort of foundational building block to the rest of your schooling. After 3rd grade, we use reading to learn. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't figure out, right, if you don't have the skills that you need in 3rd grade, then after that, you are building on faulty foundation, right? Because we're not going to go back and teach how to read. We've already done that. We're using it now for the rest of our educational progress, right? So 4th grade reading is a really important marker to understand, like, where have we met the mark, right? And where have we not, frankly? Mm-hmm. And for years, we've been sort of lagging in this world of reading as a marker, right? This is not a place that we've got we don't have 100% of our kids reading on grade level. We know that. Wow. But in last year, right? So in the midst of we did NAEP testing in 2022. Mm-hmm. The results came out last year. Obviously, this takes into account what happened during the pandemic and the huge amount of kids that were out of school or were in school virtually, right? And what we saw is that an enormous amount of kids.
The largest drop in the history of NAEP.
Largest drop we've ever seen. We are back to like the days when we were just starting NAEP testing.
Wow. So what do we do about that? Do we need more data? Do we need, how can we rebuild? How can we ensure that this next generation of our workforce has the skills they need to be, participants and to succeed?
I mean, there's so much I think that can and should be done, but I think from our perspective, one of the key things is we need to keep measuring, mm-hmm. right? We can't stop measuring, and that's a big fight mm-hmm. in a lot mm-hmm. of places across the country. Is like, we don't like testing. People don't want to test, and how else do you know how, whether you're on track or not? And so I think measurement is really important. What you measured gets done. Mm-hmm. The policy is really important here, and K through 12 education gets mired in politics mm-hmm. pretty quickly, and so we need the business community and all other stakeholders to really engage and care about what happens in our public education system. We had progress on reading and math in the early 2000s. And I would say that was in response to No Child Left Behind and the requirement that we assess in grades 3 through 8, grades 3 through 8 once in high school on reading and math, as Caitlin said, or the requirement that we do that assessment, right? That was the federal law requiring it. And disaggregate that data. Let's understand how low-income kids are doing, kids with disabilities, Black kids, Hispanic kids. We didn't do that before. We didn't know. And so we could sort of hide folks in the averages, right? We could look at a school or look at a district and say, oh, on average, everyone's doing well. Disaggregate
but that specificity feels very important.
It feels very important, right? And I think that is one thing that seems like even the right and left or, the politics continues to at least feel good about the idea that like disaggregation of the data that we have is really important to understand how those subgroups are doing. And that's then how we pay attention, right? So if we know in a particular district that they're not doing well in math in 4th grade, then they can double down on what they need to do. And I saw it with my own kids, elementary school, so many years ago, right? They thought they were great forever. And all of a sudden, they realized they were falling behind in math. And their kids were not up to where they needed to be. And the entire school came together to figure out how to fix that. And so that was sort of the beauty of, pieces of No Child Left Behind was that shining that spotlight and then giving, the goal was to give extra resources to those places that needed it. And so in that future of data report that Caitlin talked about, like some of the sort of stark things that we found is like we actually don't know whether or not the resources went to where they needed to go and what happened with those resources. I mean, there's some of the like research lacking in some of those sort of key critical areas that we hope that as we begin to think about another reauthorization of this federal law, there are some things we need to understand in order to know what worked and didn't work.
Well, and I want to pick up on you mentioned the school kind of understanding where they needed to address achievement gaps. I think that's something that's so interesting about our country, right? It's federal law, but working in conjunction with state and local and the people on the ground that know their community better than anyone else. I wonder, are there any states that are serving as are really kind of acing the game in how they collect data, or are maybe an example for what works and something that we should take a look at on the federal level as a way to think about capturing and tracking data and making sure that we're understanding what's really happening in the communities, not just on an average basis, but really thinking of children as individuals and how do you address individual needs and skills attainment.
Who's hitting it out of the park, back in
or just maybe doing a better job than others.
It's funny. I was in a state yesterday who actually was on a trajectory to was always sort of widely recognized as on sort of the right path forward, and I think even they were saying they feel like they are data rich and information poor, right? Wow. Like that's the thing about K through 12 as opposed to, say, higher education. In K-12, we've got data galore now. But are we using that data to inform policy? Do we know, like, how are we using it in ways to advance teaching and learning and help individual students? I'm not sure that it was created for that purpose. And so that was another thing about this work that we did, which was to think, okay, we believe in measurement, we believe in assessments, but we also understand that we've advanced in technology now that we can use assessments in different ways. And there's an important, thing about accountability and accountability for districts and maybe accountability for schools, but there's also a way to use assessments to help that teaching and learning piece and advance the individual, which wasn't what that accountability regime was developed really to do. Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
Totally. No, I think this is a really important piece because there is another really important factor here, Megan, which is what parents think, right? For parents, you're getting regular, what we would consider quarterly, right, grades. You get report cards every quarter, and it tells you, is your kid an A student, and you take that, right, as your information. So we actually recently this year surveyed parents asking, in partnership with a couple other organizations, Learning Heroes in particular, to survey parents to say, where do you believe your child is? 92% of parents across the country said they thought their kid was on grade level, right? They thought their kid was where they needed to be, 92%, right? But going back to the point that we had just talked about earlier, where
I'm worried you're going to tell me where they really were.
33% of fourth graders were proficient in reading.
Wow.
So let's lay this over each other, right? 90% of parents think their kid is where they need to be. 33% of fourth graders are reading on grade level.
Wow.
37% of fourth graders are proficient in math. 31% of eighth graders are proficient in reading, and 26% of eighth graders are proficient in math.
And it's worse if you're looking at, say, Black kids. It's 1 in 10.
Well, actually, I have, so fourth grade reading, so I said 33% of fourth graders are proficient in reading. When you're talking about Black kids, 17%.
Wow.
Hispanic kids, 21%. White kids, 42%.
Wow.
This is all, by the way, down from the last time we did this in 2019, right? And so part of this is really was the underpinning for our sort of thought about where this future of data report, why is the future of data so important, and how do we sort of deal with multiple issues at once? And one of them is just, how do we think about getting parents the information that they need, teachers the information that they need, right? And administrators the information that they need. And to Cheryl's point, right? We also need to be measuring at a federal level. We need to understand where our kids are, where our pain points are, and how do we make sure that in the end, all of our kids, every single one of our kids are prepared for whatever the world of work looks like in the future. And we know, by the way, that the vast majority of kids that are in K-12 right now will not be in jobs that even have a name. Right? I mean, think about, right?
Right.
In 2020, none of us were talking about Chat GPT.
Right. So we just don't even have any idea what the requirements will be.
No idea what the future will be. Right. We have no idea what those jobs are going to need. So if we don't know what the job is, we certainly don't know what the skill is. But I can tell you what, regardless, you're going to need to know how to read and write, right? And do math. Right? There are basic, we know, right? There are basic foundational skills that every single kid needs to have.
Right.
And I think it's really, right? Caitlin, talk about what parents think, and 92%. And it's not because have their head in the sand or they're not paying attention. No. I have my own kid because you're looking at their grades. Right. And my eighth grader said he was an A student in algebra in eighth grade. A student all through the year. Guess what? He failed the Virginia State assessment. Wow. Or eighth grade math. Wow. So, hello, his teacher has been telling me for an entire solid year, he knows exactly what he needs to do. And the assessment, if it is assessing what he needs to know and be able to do, I mean, I'm going to look at that. I want to know what's the disconnect there, and then how is that being used then to help figure out, okay, what's happening here?
Right.
And so it's not, it's not to suggest that parents aren't paying attention. I think they are being given.
It's really hard.
It's really hard, and and we need to align these things. My God.
Right. Oh my gosh. So it sounds like we have just, very steep challenges, but I'm so glad there are smart people thinking about them. And, I think sometimes understanding the problem is the first step, right? Understanding the challenge is the first step to creating a solution. So I'm heartened to know that we're understanding a bit of our challenges. And I think we all believe in, American ingenuity. We'll figure it out. And, so glad that people like the two of you are working on these things and thinking about them. Cheryl, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic conversation. To our listeners, remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter at Penta Group, PENTAGRP. I'm your host, Meghan Pennington, and as always, thanks for listening to What's at Stake.